Greetings, class. This is my attempt to give you an example of what your talk could look like. You're doing a talk for each 2 chapters that we read, one a week, where you have the questions that are learned in Schoology, 3 required questions and 3 extra credit questions. You might do your talk in a Zoom, like you might be coming in person, and so you might sit across from me with some distance between us, and we might open a Zoom and you might do it in Zoom using the screen sharing options like I am. Or you could also record your 5-minute talk in Screencastify and share your screen and do your talk that way. But you should have your annotations up. That's a big part of it. We want to see your face and your talk, but we also want to see the annotations that you made on the document. You're sharing those. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to stick to the 5 minutes. So the video will be a little over 5 minutes, but only because I explained the purpose first. Okay. So the first question says to note any moments where you see the 2 devices that you were tracking occur and explain the importance. And 2 devices that I am tracking through the book are theme and symbol. And you start to see theme emerge, although it's really early. This is the very first chapter, the things they carried. You start to see theme emerge on pages 1 and 2. I highlighted theme emerge on page 23. So I'm going to scroll to page 23. I was thinking of simple. All right, on page 23, here we go. This sentence right here, they carried all the emotional baggage of men who might die, grief, terror, love, longing. These were intangibles, but the intangibles had their own mass and specific gravity. They had tangible weight, right? So that's really he's getting at. And you know, if you think about like, this whole chapter is about what the men carried. The title of the book is the things they carried. I'm pretty sure that this idea of carrying as a metaphor for things that are intangible is going to continue throughout the book. And by the time I finish reading, I'm going to walk away with some kind of insight about, you know, some kind of insight into that, like what we do about it, or you know what's a truth related to it. But I know that that's something that is going to carry through the book. So that's a theme that I see emerging and something that I'm going to be tracking throughout. The second literary technique that I tracked is symbol, and in this particular chapter, that was really represented for me in the specific things that the men carried and how those things seem to represent something about those characters. Jimmy Cross carried letters from a girl named Martha. His problem seems to be that he's a bit of a romantic and he's having a hard time like placing himself in a war where romance doesn't really have a place. Ted Lavender, who was scared, carried tranquilizers and also, you know, so many ounces of premium dope because he's trying to do something, some kind of, some kind of self-medicating for the fear that he's feeling. So the things they carry really represent all of these other things about them that aren't tangible, right? Their fear, their hopes, their desires, their wishes. Norman Bowker carried a diary. I don't know what that means about him yet, but it makes me think that maybe he's like a character who really, you know, has a lot internal that he needs to get out, and you know, and maybe he needs a way to do that. And how will the war impact him? Rat Kiley carried comic books. You know, maybe he's kind of a younger or more childish character, you know, and that makes you think about like, how's the war going to impact him? Because you know he's going to lose his innocence. Comic books for me kind of symbolize that. Kiowa carried a devout Baptist, carried the Bible, and then you have to think, when someone's in a situation of war, how might that shake their faith? How might that make their beliefs change, or they might question them? And he'll run up against that. So the symbols that I saw emerging in this chapter were how all the different specific things that the men carried also seemed to symbolize something about who they were and what they wanted or what they needed or what they didn't have or what they felt throughout the chapter. The second question is, appreciate a specific moment from the chapter that appealed to you or resonated with you that you thought was particularly well phrased. On page 21. And this is hard. I love this book, and there's a lot of it that I really appreciate. So to pick specific moments was a little tough. But on page 21, hopefully I highlighted. Ah, should be here with a voice comment, but I'm not sure what happened there. Hold on. So I'm just gonna, I know what section it was. I'm not sure why it didn't stay highlighted, but this moment where Norman Bowker and Kiowa have this back and forth where Kiowa really wants to talk about what happened, right? Where he's like recalling the incident to him, like cement. He whispered, I swear, he's trying to tell this story to Norman Bowker, and Norman Bowker just wants him to shut up because he doesn't want to think about it, right? So that starts to tell us about Norman Bowker is writing in his diary, like he doesn't, you know, whereas Keo is comfortable, he wants to talk about it. He wants to talk it through. And then, Norman Bowker tells him to be quiet, but then at the end of the scene, after a little bit of quiet and Keo was sitting there thinking about it, he's running over and over it again in his head. Norman Bowker finally says, all right, talk, right? Because he can't stand the silence. And he makes this last comment, one thing I hate, it's a silent Indian. And one of the things I loved about this scene is it really flips some stereotypes on their head. You have the character who is Native American, and the stereotype there is that Native American are stoic people. It's actually flipped here. That Norman Bowker is the more stoic character that doesn't want to talk about it, and I appreciated that moment in the text. Also, okay, so finding a moment that was confusing. Okay, that was a little tough for me just because I've taught this book a number of years. So it's hard to remember what was confusing for me in the beginning. But I will say that if you look at page 13, it's got some really good examples where I'm just not really very knowledgeable, nor am I that interested in doing research into some of this specific war terminology. And so that was a struggle for me at first because I thought that I needed to know, like have vast knowledge. I've since learned over time that I can just kind of know, okay, that's a type of gun and that's going to be okay. But all this section where it talks about M60s, M16s, M79s, AK-47s, LAWs, all these like RPGs, Ks, like I don't necessarily remember what all of those things are. And I've learned some of them over time just from teaching. But what I found, my first reading, I kind of panicked a little, like, oh gosh, I have to learn all these. But I found over time that I can get the essence of it. It's not really the most important part of the book. But at first, I was definitely a little thrown off by all of the, CHICOMs and CARs and all these abbreviations that I don't necessarily know. Number 4, bonus question. I'm going for the extra credit, man. What do you see as a major theme developing? I already talked about that because that was one of my terms that I used, but I'm not going to cheat. I'm still going to give something more. I also see a theme developing about the consequences of war and the way certain events, and that signified to me like the way certain events just get repeated over and over within the chapter, and like it expresses the disbelief, right? So like the death of Ted Lavender, which we learn, way up toward the front when we're first introduced to Ted Lavender, who said he was scared and he carried tranquilizers until he was, right? And we get that like really harsh news that he died a violent death, but it gets repeated over and over and over and over. And that sense of disbelief and the senselessness of war and death that happens not just in that moment, but in other moments throughout the chapter 2 is a theme that I see developing. I see that the writer is trying to, develop that in terms of like, how can, like, what can we ultimately conclude or say about that? It's still really early on, so I'm not going to say, what it maybe all adds up to yet, but I'm definitely looking to see what I think O'Brien is suggesting about the consequences of war and why it might be something we want to think about. How did this chapter make you feel overall, and what choices did the writer make that you think probably contributed to that feeling? So much I could say here. I felt sad and moved, a bit angry and disgusted at times. I even laughed at times. Some of the interaction between the characters and the banter and the dialogue and the camaraderie had funny moments or like funny things that were said. So it was a real range of emotions. Um, and I think that some things that he did that helped this happen is the specificity, the very specific detail that we get about these characters. And like a good example of that, actually, I'm right on right here with this story about going to see Bonnie and Clyde, and Martha wore a tweed skirt, and during the final scene, he touched her knee. The specificity of that moment and the way you can really imagine it is a strength. Also, parallelism and repetition, the way like the structure of sentences that they carried, and just the repetition of certain ideas that keep coming up throughout. The use of questions throughout, and the way the writer will ask questions, rhetorical questions that then the reader is thinking about, and the variety of sentence links, how there are some sentences that are flowing and like really mimic like thought, almost stream of consciousness. And then there are other sentences that are just very short, like to the point. And that variety of sentences, I think, adds to the shifting emotions. But my overall impression is that I went through quite a range of emotions in this chapter. The last extra credit question is that what was one really great sentence, and what did you love about it? And so on page 13, I used this one as an example of how you can use the comment voice button. If you highlight something, like select it here, and then you click comment and voice or video, you can make a comment that is spoken, and then maybe you can share that in your presentation. So I'm just going to hit play here. I talked a little bit about this sentence that I picked. It's hard to pick a sentence that really great sentence from this chapter, because there are so many and so many things that I love about them. But this one in particular, Kiowa, who saw it happen, said it was like watching a rock fall or a big sandbag or something just boom, then down, not like the movies where the dead guy rolls around and does fancy spins and goes ass over tea kettle. Not like that, Kiowa said. That sentence, that whole sentence, to me, with its syntax, so its use of commas and parallel phrases, mimics the way the character feels in that moment and really evokes a sense of Kiowa's incredulity of this memory that he's trying to like grapple with, right? He's remembering it, he's thinking about it, and even the structure of that sentence conveys the feeling that the character has in that moment. And O'Brien seems particularly good at that. And so that's a sentence that I love from this chapter. Okay, so just to recap, that's what it will look like. You can do it in screencast and turn in that link, and that's not happening live. You can do it in class. We would enter a Zoom so that you could share your screen, but we would do it across from each other in the classroom. If you're in the classroom, we can, you can present in the Wednesday office hours. There's some different possibilities that you'll have, but every week you're going to read 2 chapters once we get going with this reading schedule after this first chapter. So for chapters 2 and 3, you'll pick a chapter to talk about. You'll annotate the PDF using the questions that are posted in that annotation assignment in Schoology, and then you will present your response just like this. And this is a sample of it. Yeah, that's all I have. And I can't wait to see what you think.